A sound democracy needs informed citizens. A sound democracy can only function well if citizens can obtain proper information on public matters, if they can understand them, of course, and if they can deliberate about them. If social media provides citizens with new opportunities to access information, enable them to express their opinions and to participate in democratic processes. But we already know it. Social media can also undermine democracy by distorting information, promoting false stories and facilitating political manipulation. So are social media a blessing or a curse for democracy? I am Evi Kiorri, and you're listening to Communicating Democracy, the EuroPCom podcast on public communication. On this episode, we will explore with our guest Trisha Meyer whether social media are a blessing or a curse for democracy. Trisha is director of the Research Center for Digitalisation, Democracy and Innovation, academic coordinator of the Jean Monnet Winter and Summer Schools on EU policy making, and assistant professor of digital governance and participation at the Brussels School of Governance. She is also principal investigator of the EDMO BELUX project, an EU-funded hub on research, fact-checking and media literacy on online disinformation in Belgium and Luxembourg. Thank you for joining us, Trisha. There is a lot that you've been doing already on social media and democracy.
First of all, thanks for having me here.
Of course, it is more complicated to come up with a yes or no answer to if social media is a curse or blessing for democracy. However, research shows that digital media impacts political behavior globally. There are concerns about the adverse impacts of social media on democracy. But there are also opportunities for greater citizen participation and engagement that can benefit to the democratic processes.
And to answer that question, I think it can be either. I think that's an obvious one. It was also in how we described this episode that in part we need to look at what platforms do, but also how it's being used by others as well, including political actors.
Now, given the fact that social media always has been related to societal context and holds a strong responsibility regarding political actors, do you think that audience targeting is somehow influencing transparency?
I do not think that currently algorithms are transparent. How they are set up. I think the Digital Services Act provides us with opportunities to look underneath the hood of how platforms are prioritizing content, also how they are moderating content in other ways, in particular the takedown of content or blocking of users. Mm-hmm. But it still remains incredibly difficult to get access to data, meaningful data, mm-hmm. I should say that. And we see that that's something that is ongoing. I personally have been very keen to understand what platforms report. So mm-hmm. I've combed through all of the reports that signatories to the original Code of Practice on Disinformation submitted to understand what they say their practices are, and to then match that with what do their terms and conditions, and then also how does it look like on the platforms themselves in terms of actual practices. And we see that kind of amplified with the strengthened Code of Practice on Disinformation, that there's a lot of reporting ongoing, mm-hmm. reporting leading to transparency, and in a far more structured way. I would note here that transparency tends to become the end goal rather than a means to achieve something beyond. Mm-hmm. And that's in part because a lot of effort has to go into providing that transparency. But at the same time, we really must be pushing for more, right? So in the context of us thinking of social media as being a blessing or a curse for democracy, what we really need to emphasize there is transparency isn't going to be enough. And what we do notice is that a lot of the current EU policy measures are pointing towards transparency. And we're really going to have to make sure that we go beyond that, and we ensure that actually then, once we know what's going on, that action is being taken as well.
Mm-hmm. Now, staying a little bit longer on this topic, because it's quite interesting, and the polarization that comes with social media, it seems like social media provide a bigger liberty to any citizen to express their views and their opinions, no matter how extreme their opinions or their views are. And then we also have the trolls that provide content to this 24/7 loop going on social media. So I would like to ask if the main reason why social media are being abused lies on the characteristics that they're built on, or if there are also other factors behind this.
That's an excellent question. And the answer is multifold as well. There certainly are aspects to the, as we would call them in social, as we note them in academic literature. no need to go into the specifics, but we call them the affordances of platforms, right? So what behavior or what use does a platform actually allow or encourage, nudge you towards? Mm-hmm. And also that means how can it be abused, or how can it be turned around? Mm-hmm. And what we really see here is two aspects to this. On the one hand, the internet itself was built as a medium, networks of networks to really spread information widely, without borders, etc. So you have that aspect of the desire really for it to spread, and then how the algorithms of social media platforms and the objectives or the interests of social media platforms to keep you engaged on platforms, to how that plays into that. So certainly the features or the affordances of how social media platforms are set up and algorithms in prioritizing content that they know that you are more likely to engage with, content that is popular, content that often is also controversial and therefore polarizing, that contributes to the problem, right? But on the other hand, there's also certainly the use of that by trolls, by those who seek to influence societal or political debates, of making use of that. Mm-hmm. And that might be permitted within, not trolls, but it might be use that actually is permitted, or it might be really stretching it and abusing data, or mm-hmm. using manipulative techniques, etc. So it really is, and it really is a little bit of both. And I think that's where we're trying to strike that balance of understanding the responsibility that each player has here in this ecosystem.
And manipulation of data usually leads to disinformation, which is actually a very important and a thorny issue, I would say. And it can occur from all sides, even from the side of politicians. And you actually worked on an experiment and on a study focusing on this. So what was the main finding on that? And what's the responsibility that lies on politicians at this stage?
Yeah. Personally, I find it a fascinating study. So it's one that I did with my colleague, Professor Lefebvre, in the context of this hub that we're involved in, EDMO BELUX. And we did an experiment where ethically, with approval and with good feedback to our respondents as well afterwards, we tried to see whether disinformation spread by politicians, so by those that you would say are opinion leaders, right, makes a difference in kind of the uptake of it. Do citizens think it's more credible if it's coming from an authority figure or an opinion leader? And we had some really interesting findings. We did this for Flanders, and then we also had a comparative study that we did for all of Belgium and Luxembourg. And for the Flemish study, to focus on that, what we saw was it does matter. Mm-hmm. There's a correlation, and you certainly see that if a politician that you support spreads disinformation, then you're more likely to believe it. On the other hand, if it's a politician that you do not support, you're actually more likely to criticize it and have a critical view. Yeah, exactly. That was interesting for us to see and pointed towards the role that political actors play in countering disinformation, but potentially also in spreading disinformation. Another interesting part that we found in these two studies was the relevance of media diversity, a diverse media diet, I should say, where we also saw that those who have a very narrow media diet, and in particular those who are only relying on social media for their news, were more likely to believe disinformation. So it also points towards there as well. What is the type of news that we're consuming or being dished on social media, and is that diverse enough? And should we, on the one hand, be encouraging citizens go to still traditional media outlets, consume your news there as well, but also how does social media go about that, right? How are they ranking, or how are they evaluating different sources of information?
And that's a vague field, and to get to the bottom of it, I think it requires a lot of research. But social media and politics is something very interesting, and I'm thinking and I'm feeling that politicians use social media as a means to come closer to their followers and feel connected and engage more via those channels that they're using in the political discourse. So do you think that social media can help politicians build authenticity with their audience and their followers, or is that something that is actually not authentic at all?
No, absolutely, they can. Social media can cut out the traditional intermediary of big media outlets here, and have voice and reach audiences, new audiences as well, directly, vice versa as well, for citizens. Of course, that's incredibly curated, right? Usually there's a team behind what is being put out, at least for larger, those who, for larger political parties or for politicians. It's not necessarily them that you're hearing, but I don't think that necessarily means that it isn't authentic. But it also kind of shows how you can use it for branding, how you can use it to portray particular aspects of yourself. But I do think this is a real aspect of social media that doesn't need to be a replacement of the role that we see that I would say media plays as crafting this public sphere, of also providing that kind of watchdog role, or at least an analysis of whether the statements of politicians are true, because that's what you don't have, right? You won't have social media evaluating, or very, very, very few instances, unless it's really a violation of speech where they'll intervene, or clearly goes against their terms and conditions, their community standards. But on the whole, they're not going to be mediating in the same way that traditional media platforms, outlets will have. So you need that. You need all of it. But it also shows, to go back to that study, the danger that we have here, right? Of it also being used as a tool to then craft messages that aren't necessarily true, that are misleading, or are incredibly polarizing vis-a-vis your political opponents.
And any concluding thoughts or something that you'd like to share with our listeners about this?
So we started out with the question whether social media is a blessing or a curse for democracy. And I think the point that I tried to raise here is that there certainly is a responsibility of platforms here, both in the architecture, the affordances of the platforms, in making sure that we are trying to have a healthy conversation. And that means not only living up to all of these EU rules that are coming into play and really going beyond transparency, but also trying to deal with systemic risks. For instance, there's aspects of needing to kind of tackle how algorithms work and what type of content that is being featured. But there's also a lot of responsibility of others, and we talked a bit about political actors in making sure that there are rules also that apply to them, that it's clear, and I think that's where the EU draft regulation on the transparency and targeting of political advertising comes in and is really timely in the context of the upcoming elections of the EU, which will help a little bit. But again, it's mostly just focusing on transparency of like, here's the lay of the land, rather than really ensuring that we have ethical use. There's a whole component here to needing to kind of balance, and that's perhaps an important part that we haven't spoken of yet, is freedom of expression and how you balance against that, right? You do not want the platforms to become the judges really of what acceptable speech is, nor do you want politicians to be in situations where they are not able to criticize, where they're not able to have this legitimate conversation that we need about the performance of other political parties, etc. But in all of this, and this is where I bring in the citizen component as a concluding thought, I think there's a lot that we need to do on understanding what the digital public sphere looks like, and in particular in articulating that there were that really there's a need for continually trying to understand the other. And that's really lost in digital spaces, where it's so easy to feel anonymous or to think that the other is simply a text, a tweet, whatever, that you're responding to, but actually there's an individual behind that, right? And so to continually be thinking of, okay, what is, well, absolutely having the right to express your opinion, to also think of, well, what does this mean? What is this contributing? Is this actually healthy for democracy?
Perfect. Well, thank you very much, Trisha.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you, Trisha, for sharing your insights on social media and democracy. And to our listeners, we hope you enjoyed this episode of the Communicating Democracy podcast. And if you want to discover more about the link between democracy and technology, check out our EuroPCom podcast series. And of course, if you liked this episode, feel free to share it with your network. Thank you for tuning in, and until next time. This is a podcast series of the European Committee of the Regions. For more information on EuroPCom, please visit the website core.europa.eu.